So, hello everyone. This is Turk. I'm Kanishk. With me is my co-host Devansh, and of course we have a very special guest today with us, Ankit Bhuptani. A lot of credentials after his name, but I would like to let the man introduce himself. So, Ankit, the floor is all yours.
Hello, folks. Good to be here. So, this is Ankit Bhuptani. I'm based out of Mumbai. I'm an LGBT rights activist, founder of Queer Hindu Alliance, which connects the dots between LGBT rights and Hinduism. I work in the social development sector in an NGO called Vidya, and I'm currently pursuing my MBA in social entrepreneurship. And apart from all of that, I consider myself Gandhian at heart and very passionate about India, India's heritage, culture, and many other things. Good to be here.
Ankit
Good
is
to
being
have you
really
with us.
modest about himself here at this point. I just like to put that out there. Ankit has not only worked with the United Nations, he's been there, he's spoken at the forums very passionately about LGBTQ rights and human rights. And I've had the privilege to sit in a class that was taught by Ankit. And so that's how I got to know him. And he has been an amazing friend since ever. He's also very passionate about India's foreign affairs. I continuously eat his head about these things. I text him at random times. I'm like, "Hello, Ankit, what does this mean?" And he replies very patiently and very nicely. So he's been very modest with his introduction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shah.
So, Ankit, before we get started, what have you been up to, and what are you reading right now? That's like a question we're sort of trying to develop just right in. Anything you
Wrong
read?
question to ask me because I'm not a reader. I'm a listener, so I consume my books in the audio format.
Oh,
And
same here.
yeah, so I'm more of a reader, more of a listener and a seer than reader and writer. That's how I am. So I'm currently re-listening to this book called as Journey Home by Radhanath Swami. It's an American guy born in Chicago, hitchhiked all his way from Chicago to India to in this quest of something higher. It's a beautiful book and describes his journey full of many obstacles, and yet he's able to find his home in India. So it's a lovely book by Radhanath Swami, Journey Home. That's what I'm listening to right now.
Guys, to check out the book. Sounds really interesting. I have been reading, I think day before yesterday, I've been reading this interview. Uh, like ISKCON did this interview with George Harrison and Lennon and Yoko Ono. So reading the transcript, pretty interesting. Like, have you come across it? Any chance?
No, I'm not, but I know George Harrison was quite involved in Indian history and spirituality and yoga and things like that, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. As a matter of fact, ISKCON, they Beatles, when they came down to India, they made this ashram in Haridwar, which I had the pleasure
Yes.
of visiting like quite recently.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful
Yeah.
place, and they made their album. A lot of songs in Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. There are a lot of songs there. Some of them have classical influences as well, so they made parts of that album right here in India.
So if you want to know how George Harrison got involved with ISKCON, there is a book called as Chasing the Rhinos by
Chasing the
Shyama
Night.
Sundar Das. Chasing the Rhinos by Shyama Sundar Das, who's an ISKCON devotee, one of the initial disciple of Srila Prabhupada when he went to America. And from America, he travels to UK and he meets Beatles there, and how Beatles gets introduced to Srila Prabhupada and ISKCON movement, and how their that album Hare Krishna, I think, Oh My Sweet Lord or something like that is the lyrics that got released, and that gave that gave an opportunity to ISKCON to be well known throughout uh, the world at that time. So it's a quite interesting book, Chasing the Rhinos by Shyama Sundar Das.
I mean, that's a pretty interesting thing, right? So it sort of brings me to my first question. What is so mesmerizing or what's so enticing about Hinduism? Like, you have your religions back in the States, right? You have pretty strong adherent religions back in the state. So what really draws people to Hinduism, if you had to sort of answer that?
Hmm. See, the thing is, when you go to Subway, the unique selling point of Subway is you can make your own sub. And no matter how you make it, it is gonna taste delicious. As far as you do not break the boundaries or ingredients subscribed by Subway. Hinduism has something similar. It has diverse set of options and combinations subscribed, which you can pick and choose. If it is authentic and subscribed by respective acharyas and paramparas within Hinduism, no matter what you do within that boundary is your own space and you can make your own sub. Quite funny that I'm using the terminology of Subway, but if you see, this is how it is. So if I look at my life, I'm a practitioner of Bhakti Yoga. So I follow Bhakti Yoga, the path of love and using emotion as a tool to connect with the divine. But at the same time, I am a meditator. I practice Sudarshan Kriya by Art of Living, Shri Shri Ravi Shankar Ji on daily way, on regular way. And it helps me on my Bhakti Yoga, So we have this freedom to make our own path, and nothing is non-Hindu within this boundary of Sanatan way of living. Is the most unique approach of Hinduism. And I think that is why so many people get attracted towards the concept of Sanatan Dharma. See, the conversation of religion and spirituality, and I explain this in my talks with an example of a banana. So spirituality is the banana and religion is the shell, the cover. For banana to transfer from one place where it was grown to its consumer, the banana alone cannot be transferred. It will get contaminated. It will not be in the form wherein you can consume it. So for the religious or for the spiritual principles and the core values of spirituality to transform from one generation to another and from one human to another in the same time, it has a beautiful cover, a shell of religion for spirituality to travel. Now, if somebody is stuck at the cover itself and thinks that this is all about it, then it is their loss. Hey, religion was just the cover to protect the spirituality inside, the masala inside, the core inside. So I think we need to have that wisdom to protect the core spiritual values with a shell called religion, and also have the wisdom to go beyond the shell to reach the core, which is the spirituality.
I mean, it's sort of like there's this, I don't remember the quote exact, but it's like it's in human nature, curiosity is something that is built into human nature, and like that's what led the man to remove the peel and find the fruit inside. I think that's sort of the journey you need to make to get to spirituality. Okay, I have a question for you. That's something that you're really passionate about. Is that Hinduism and LGBTQ? And I'm not even going to frame it as a question. I'm going to throw it open as a topic to you. Hinduism and LGBTQ. Please enlighten us.
So Hinduism, not just Hinduism, all the religion which are born out of India, whether it's Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Buddhism, you see that their core values derives from observing nature. You will see a lot of nature within its stories, symbols, and rituals among all these four religions, which is born out of India. So when you observe nature, what do you see? The very first thing which we as a human see, and this can be described by even a child, and that is that nature is diverse.
Absolutely.
We see there is a diversity of fruits, diversity of vegetables, diversity of tree, diversities of animals, diversity of seasons. So that means the nature is diverse, which any human being without any kind of PhDs can make the statement. Now, when we observe this, we will understand that if a nature is diverse, one of its outcome, one of its expansion, one of its expression, one of its product, human, will also be diverse. How can all the humans be same? Humans are diverse too. this core value of nature and humanity being diverse is ingrained in all the religion which are born out of India: Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. And that's why there is so much of room for diversity. And when you have a diversity, you also need another component, and that is inclusion. Because diversity without inclusion leads to a conflict. So in the corporate world, when I we hear a lot of time this terminology like diversity and inclusion, diversity and inclusion. But these are not any new concept. These are the living experience of humans for centuries, very much true for India at least. So our rishis, maharishis, and then sages of those time observed this diversity of humans, and they pen it down in their scriptures. So when I studied the theology of India, primarily Hinduism, for over 2 years, I discovered that there is n amount of or n number of examples within scriptures, in rituals, in symbols, and in stories, which talks about diverse gender identities, orientation, and expression. You would be surprised that I have listed down 76 Sanskrit terminologies which talks about diverse gender identity, orientation, and expressions. Sanskrit mein, written 700 BCE, 500 BCE, and in a text like Charaka Samhita, Garga Samhita, Narada Smriti, Sanskrit Shabda Kalpadruma, and so on and so forth. How fascinating is that? Just the idea. So to answer your question, which is like 1.5 hour presentation by itself, which I have done that in your institute, in a very small or one sentence, is that when Krishna opened his mouth in front of Mother Yashoda, when Mother Yashoda said, "Did you eat dirt? Show me, open your mouth." And when he opened his mouth, the universe was shown within his mouth. And I always say that if universe was shown within Krishna's mouth, will LGBTQIA plus people would have been left out? If no, and if we as queer community were part of Krishna's existence, the universal form, who are you to reject me today from religious perspective?
Beautiful answer. I think I have goosebumps. Beautiful answer.
That's what you call a like a mic drop moment.
Absolutely.
You should actually practice doing that once you have spoken that. Beautiful.
And it's really fascinating that, all these concepts that we now hear are coming, that are sort of coming from the Western ideology with in regards to, your gender identity or gender sexuality is something that has already existed within our culture from, ages ago. But it's just that a lot of people aren't aware of it.
Yeah, it has also a lot to do with the foreign power ruling us. First of all, the Mughals, and after that, the British. British the most, as far as LGBT community and criminalization of that is concerned, and putting this community under the carpet is concerned, more than Mughals, it is the British who brought in IPC 377 in 1800s and criminalized homosexuality in India. And once you criminalize something, how can criminals celebrate something which is considered as crime or talk about it publicly? So 200 years of British Raj has done a lot of negative and positive, mostly negative impact on India, and LGBT people's freedom is one of them.
Talking about criminalization to our viewers, it's a lucky coincidence today that today is 6th of September. We're recording this episode on the day that 377 was decriminalized. It's a lucky coincidence and we're really happy about it.
Yeah,
so,
that
Ankit,
journey
what were
was
you
not
doing
easy.
on that day? What exactly were you doing that day? Do you remember?
Oh God, definitely. Why not? So the day when it was decriminalized, that finally in 2018, I was with my friends waiting for the news, and we celebrated with tears in our eyes, the tears of joy. And immediately after that, I ran to one of the very beautiful place in Mumbai called ISKCON's Radha Gopinath Temple in Girgaon Chowpatty, which is my favorite place in Mumbai. And I had darshan of Lord Krishna, the form which I dearly adore, and like told him thank you. So that's what I was doing on in 2018. But that journey has not been easy. We also remember the 2013 judgment by the same Honorable Supreme Court of India, which recriminalized us. So, just in case people do not know the history of IPC 377, it was bought by British, which criminalized homosexuality in India, which was challenged in Delhi High Court by many activists and NGOs, NAS Foundation being one of them, primary applicant. Delhi High Court read down it in 2009. So we were decriminalized, we were given freedom. And then it was challenged by all the religion, not even a single out, okay? All the religion in Supreme Court together, these are the religion who fight among themselves most of the time, came all together against us in Supreme Court and filed a petition against Delhi High Court. Supreme Court on 2013 recriminalized us. So we were decriminalized, again criminalized. And 11th December 2013 was the day when the negative judgment came in. I was not out to anybody during that time. I was at this organization called Humsafar Trust, which is the India's first LGBT rights organization. They're headquartered in Mumbai, in Wakola. I was there with my community members just to see the judgment, whether it's positive or negative. And as the negative judgment came in, we were again in tears, but that time it was of sadness, disappointment. And I just came out that day. I just came out to the whole world at one go, boom, by being on television, one channel after another, being participating in various TV debates and talking about today's judgment, which has disappointed the community. So yeah, we have seen those days as well. And so I always say that I was born in a country where I was born as criminal from the day I was born, because my sexuality is by birth. So I was just born as criminal, but I'm breathing in a country where I'm no more a criminal. And I want to die in a country where I have equal civil rights as well.
Mic drop moment again, should we say? But on that note, I guess we can take a short break because our recording time is just about to get over. And I guess we can continue on from there.
All right, guys.
All right, so we're
Welcome
back.
back after that break.
Elongated break, if I may. And yeah, so just before we start recording, we were discussing with Ankit about what we should be discussing. And the question which popped up was, what is it like being gay in India? And I mean, it's not talking about the harsh realities. We're talking about the fun bits too. How is it like? Ankit, so deep dive.
Thank you for asking that question. If I answer that question, what it likes to be gay in India today, and because we are talking on a day when we are celebrating 3rd anniversary of reading down IPC 377, let me start by saying that I feel our generation of queer people is the luckiest generation in India. Do you know why? Because the generation who struggles for the freedom values the most. We all have got independence like 75 years ago. We are celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav right now. But we may not be able to cherish this freedom as much as the generation who struggled to get it, because it is just given to us by birth. But from the queer perspective, our generation who were born as criminal have struggled to get this freedom and breathing this freedom right now. And our generation probably would be the same one who would be seeing the days of marriage equality and adoption rights as well. At least I have all hopes up, if not adoption rights, but till the time I die, I want to see marriage equality in India. And God willing, that would happen. Currently, there are over 5 petitions under review in various high courts of the country. 3 of them are in Delhi High Court. After the 2 petitions are done by a good friend of mine, Gopi Shankar Madurai and Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Right? So I feel that we as a queer generation is the luckiest living queer generation of India, who have seen the dark days, who struggled for it and have got the freedom and would be getting a better days ahead. So that's on a macro level. Now coming on a micro level, I don't see, at least in the cities, any kind of active discrimination, or at least again, I'm so out and I just don't care about if you reject me. So, the hate doesn't reach to me, the homophobic hate, as much as it would be reaching to somebody else. But despite that, I think it is so good, wherein there are so many support groups out there who are talking about LGBT rights, they're talking about mental health of queer people. There are social gatherings, the forums and platforms. There are parties which happen very publicly in good properties in metros, and then things like that is there. So from your social to your personal to civil rights, from all perspective, we as a queer generation is much better placed than where we were like 10 years ago and when we were 5 years ago. From all the aspect of life, you will see whether it's, we have like Doctors Association coming out in pride and support. We have parents group, parents who happens to have queer children are coming out in support of their own children, called Swikar is a parents group out there. We have religious organizations and support groups talking about LGBT rights and their being spiritual, religious from their perspective, right? So a students group, diversity, inclusion and equity conversation in corporates. The number of workshops I have conducted for various business organizations, and I sit as a capacity builder on various boards of companies today, is so many who are talking about LGBT inclusion and diversity. So from all aspects of human life, we are living in one of the finest time in the queer history of India, for sure. So that's what it means to be queer in India right now.
I recall a tweet today about Axis Bank.
Okay, please go on. Sure.
I recall this tweet of yours today about Axis Bank, where they finally come out with something that you can open an account with with the same-sex partner, irrespective of gender, basically. And I recall you congratulating them on it. So, is Axis Bank the first? Is that the first of its its organization who's done something like this, or has it existed?
No.
Before?
So the multinational banks have done it. Like HSBC had it before. I think Indian Bank already has it. But a very well-known Indian bank services to do that, and Axis Bank being definitely the first one to do it. And it's wonderful that they are doing it. So now what I'll be doing is, when I do capacity building of business houses, and when they ask me, Ankit, tell us what are the ways we can make our business diverse and inclusive from a policy point of view, I'll say that give business to the banking services which are inclusive, right? So I'll recommend Axis Bank as one of the option and prime option that you as a company would be having so many salary account. This gives you so much of business. Why don't you give this business to a company which is inclusive? So diversity, equity, inclusion, the conversation of that is not just about philanthropy or looking at from a point of view of compassion that, oh, this bichara people. No. It makes a proper business sense in today's world to be inclusive and talk about LGBT rights, not just in your advertisement, but also in your policy.
Absolutely.
That also brings me to a problematic part of this, right? So I have noticed a lot of firms doing it, and there's a term for it, right? Pinkwashing is what they call it, right? So a lot of these firms just do it for the sake of it, and the internal policies might not be reflective of actually the practices might not be actually reflective of what they are teaching online. So is there a solution, or
yeah, there is
a cultural thing which needs to change over time?
There is a solution to it. I think in the initial days, especially when IPC 377 was there, and then when it was recently read down in 2018, even if you are just doing something about LGBT, even if you're just putting a tweet out, was giving out a message that, hey, we as a company are looking towards it. But I think that honeymoon period should end at some point of time. Now you cannot just say that in the month of June, we will change our DPs in the rainbow color, we'll change our logos into rainbow color, and and then use this as a tool of marketing. But that's just not enough. I'll say that, okay, use me to earn money, no problem. Milk the queer community as much as you want, no problem out there. But make it a constant, proper, profound change in the policy as well. Don't use this as a marketing gimmick only. So do policy change and talk about that as a marketing tool is something I recommend. But on another level, I also see that, look, doing something is much better than not doing anything. So even from that angle, today one company is talking about it, which puts another company in a position to do something like that. As I have tweeted today that, hey, Axis Bank, congratulations. But hey, HDFC Bank, I am your customer for last 20 years. And as a queer person, I cannot have a joint bank account with my partner who happens to be of the same gender, right? So it put pressure on HDFC Bank also to do that, make the policy changes. So I would advise, if you are an employee of a company which talks about LGBT rights in the month of June, then ask your company that, hey, you are doing that, which is amazing, but we don't have an inclusive policy in place. Our anti-discrimination policy does not talk about LGBT rights. So that's just not enough. Please do that change, right? If you are a student and applying to a company, you can ask the company the question. Why will only company ask you question? That do you have anti-discrimination policy in place? One person may not change, but multiple people asking this question, multiple people tagging HDFC Bank to do that will make a difference. When I will tell few companies saying that, hey, why don't you look for banking services like Axis Bank who acknowledges LGBT identity, and if they are having an HDFC relation, if the HDFC may think that we will lose out of business now if we don't be inclusive, right? So in whatever situation, we need to make company accountable to what they preach, must also practice.
That makes sense. So
Ankit, you talked about marriage, and I recall you used to have you told us about these conversations that you thought of that you'd have with your daughter. Albeit you made it up as a fictional character, but could you tell us something about it, because I found it really endearing.
Okay, so let me tell you a story. I don't know if this story is true or false, but I heard it from one of the finest theater artists of our time. And she told me this one story is that when British used to rule Africa, they used to take Africans as a slave to Britain. And at that time, the flights were not invented, even if it was very expensive. So, of course, to transport the slaves, they will not use the airway. They will put it into the ship, and the ship will travel from Africa to Great Britain. And it used to take weeks to do that journey. And they were put in as animals, like so many people in very small spaces, and they were literally treated like animals when they were transporting this human cargo, quote unquote human cargo. And due to this conditioning and in not proper sanitation and food and things like that, and in harsh weather, many people used to just die during that journey. They were not able to complete the journey from Africa to Great Britain. So what they used to do is, this dead bodies, they used to just throw in the sea. That what will they do with these dead bodies once they're in Britain, right? So the better to just throw them out. They just throw these dead bodies out in the sea. Then what used to happen is, the shark of that region in the sea started getting the food from the ships. So even today, this person told me, I don't know again how much of this is true or false, but somebody can fact check it. But even if it is false, just as a story, there is something to learn. And that is that even today, the next generation of the shark still follows a ship which travels from Africa to Great Britain towards that region. Today, maybe the ship may not have a single human. It is completely computerized. Somebody sitting in London may be operating that ship. It's just full of a cargo without any living entity on that ship. But still a shark follows. Why? Because they have got something in their brain ingrained now that I need to follow this element which travels from here to here, and I'll get the food from it. Society is also like that, my friends. when we see more and more example of something around us, we start accepting it. So when not just LGBT, talking about any social change, it starts by storytelling. Somebody tells you a different possibility of living in form of a story. For an example, 50 to 60 years ago, women going out and working was considered as taboo. Then what happened? Then the Rangabhumi, the theater artist of that time, the Naval Kathakars, the novelist of those time started telling a story when a woman could go out and work. Even those times, if a theater used to take place, a woman character was played by a male character, but at least they used to show a woman character in it who used to go out and work. Right? Then slowly and steadily, by start with the storytelling, society got an idea. Then we started seeing far away people started going out and working. Then our relatives, our neighbors, in society we live in, people whom we know and people whom we do not know. In their homes, women's going out and working. When that happened, it became a regular thing. And as it comes closer and closer to your neighborhood, slowly it also enters your home. And to the extent we have seen our, few of my cousins, when they were getting married, they were looking for only, we want a wife who works. We don't want a wife who sits at home and does all kadai and silai and all that. We don't want any wife like that. We want a working woman as a life partner, right? So how this 360 change happened completely? By telling a different story. Somebody found the courage to do that and started telling a different story. So when I share the story of Katha, who is a daughter of my dream, with my partner, Katha does not exist in reality, but she's a very much a real character in our dream and a fictional character. And then she is very smart. She has good set of smart friends in school. She's just so ahead of her time in many sense. And she cuts down logically to his parents, like me and my partner on multiple occasions. She's just there. And then when I share this story with the world sees that there can be a family wherein one man and another man can start a family and can welcome another child. There can be a papa, there can be a daddy, and there can be Katha. Family comes in different shapes and sizes because it is love which makes the family, not the gender of parents. That's why I tell the story of Katha.
Devansh is smiling in the background, enjoying every moment of this.
Yeah, I don't think I think all three of us simultaneously lost all our train of thought while listening, And
exactly. We had pointers and I don't think it gets better than what's being talked right now. Anyways, so I had this question which sort of popped up when we were discussing gay in general. So why is the 70s so relevant for the queer community? This and I wanted to know, this is something which always comes to my head, right? When you think of queer parties, right? You have Giorgio Moroder's music playing in the background. You have those parties in Berlin. Why are the 70s so relevant to the queer community, if I may ask?
I can answer as much as I know from my limited understanding and what I've heard. Is that if you look at the 70s, the very first queer gathering from the perspective of rights happened in Europe in 70s. 70s is the early 70s is the time when very first time the coup, the wall, not Wall Street, what is that?
Berlin Wall.
No, Baba. New York, where there is this Wall Street, no. Stonewall, sorry. 70s is the also time, remember in early 70s was the time when Stonewall riot also happened, which is one of the pioneer conversation about LGBT rights perspective in urban, not just urban, but in a modern context. So that's why the 70s plays a very important role. 1970s is the year wherein, for the first time, LGBT pride happens in the world. So 70s is a very, very fascinating decade wherein, from an LGBT perspective, people started coming out, people started accepting themselves and acknowledging that self. And not only that, people started celebrating this diversity to its true sense. So that's why I feel 70s is fascinating, for sure.
I think of 70s, you have all of these prima donna characters, right? Donna Summers. Then we have Giorgio Moroder. I love the music from the 70s and 70s disco, right? Can't beat it. I don't know. We should have some clubs in India which play 70s disco. I guess we are really missing out on some good stuff. Anyways, I think we can go to the last question, and we have to need to wrap this up as well. Devansh, why don't you take it up?
So it's a two-parter actually, Ankit, this question. And I am going to get a little bit political here. My first question to you is, so at least because I know for myself, and I think I know for you as well, temple is something, it's like a sanctum of peace for us, especially when the place I'm talking about, you just visited, I visited. There's a profound sense of peace there, but a lot of people see it as just a place of worship. So, like, is there any way, how can we differentiate between the two? And my second question, where it gets a little bit political, is these places are meant for devotee. These places are meant for devotees.
Devansh, I'm so sorry to cut you off. Devansh, I'm sorry to cut you off. Your video was lagging, so can you please ask that question again so that we can remove the first part in the edit?
Okay. I'll shorten the question also this time around.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Ankit, places of worship are seen as a sanctum of peace, but a lot of the times it's just seen as it's as a place by a lot of people. How do we explain that difference to them? And my second question to you is, a mandir especially, or any place of worship, is a place where the devotee talks to his or her God or their God. Why should the government intervene there? What do you think about the government control on temples?
And why this question is interesting is, before I would like relate it to something which you mentioned earlier, that you made that parallel to the spirituality being the banana and the cover being religion, right? So how important are temples for that, for the spirituality to go forward, and why? And as I said, should the government interfere with a person's mode to reach spiritual state?
Interesting question, both the questions. First of all, temple is not just a place where we find peace. I think peace is not such a high goal when we talk about the way India approached life. Peace was a bare minimum. Like, for an example, if you are having a meal and somebody gives you a call, which is not so important conversation, the very obvious sentence which will come out of it, "Look, mujhe pehla shanti se khana kha lene de." That means that peace is so minimal requirement just to even have a meal, right? Let me have just a peaceful meal right now. So peace is not a higher goal. Peace was a higher goal for the places where it was nothing but the conflict. So this peace is the highest goal. Peace is the bare minimum requirement. Like, without the peace, you cannot do a single thing in your life. Forget about the complete blossoming of human consciousness. So temples are not a place of peace. I'm sorry. If you just want the peace, you can find that in a garden. You can find that at a beach. And if you are a person like me who is a regular practitioner of a meditation, you can find it in a pub as well. So for that, such a bare minimum requirement, you do not need to go to temple. But temple is something beyond. I mean, I'm not saying the temple will not give you peace. But if you are looking for peace in temple, then you are just looking for chillers from a place who could give you millions. But I feel temple was and temple should be the place wherein knowledge is shared, where different art and culture is being practiced, where different form of music, performances, all form of human expressions can be celebrated. I'll give you an example. If you go to a temple in Rajasthan of Lord Srinathji Nathdwara, you will see the beautiful paintings out there on temple walls. If you just walk through the temple bazaar till the time before you reach the temple, you will see so many shops selling different set of paintings and photographs and things. Not just photographs you'll find everywhere, but handmade artistic paintings of different leelas of Lord Krishna, the pastimes of Krishna. There you will see that there are different ways to worship divinity in form of music. There are different set of ragas which are performed in front of the deity. So the music is involved. Different set of cuisine is offered to the Lord. So food is involved. Different set of dressing, not just clothes, but the jewelry and hairdressing, hairstyle, different makeups, and all of so the complete expression of human life is centered around temple. And from that perspective, and of course, spirituality for sure. Spirituality is at the core of everything. So from this all perspective, if you see, temples are the thriving core of civilization of that part. And when we look at temple from this perspective, I feel that it should be run by the people who are connected to that temple. When a government runs temple, it is as equal to as another country ruling one another country. And we have seen how terribly it fails, even if you are continuing that practice for over 20 years with all your military power. When another country tries to rule another country, it terribly fails no matter how superpower you are. Same way, when a government tries to run the temples, they are not doing service of humanity. They degrade the sanctity of that place. So I am of an opinion, temples or any religious places for that matter should be run by the people who are connected to that place and not anybody else, as far as they follow all the rules and regulation of the land. So you cannot teach something which creates disharmony within society or promotes violence and things like that, then state need to intervene. But as far as you are following all the rules and regulations, you are not harming anybody. It let temple run by the devotees it belongs and not the government. That's my opinion.
No,
I don't think anyone
was
could
a
have
great
framed it
answer.
better. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think
when we're talking about temples as a cultural center, right? I don't really see a lot of cultural activities, at least happening in the modern temples we see in urban, urban centers, right? So, do you think, as urban centers, like in metropolitan cities, do you think temples can still play that role? And this is I promise this is the final question before we wrap up.
Yeah. The answer is yes and no, both. The reason I say first no is that the way the most of the temples are run are in very bad shape and in condition. Many of them are not properly taken care. And then there is a lot of management issues, financial issues within the current modern temples. So the answer is no. But is that the end of a road? Then again, the answer is no. And that gives me a hopeful yes answer. And here I think that in whatever capacity we can, we should explore the avenues of better utilization of resources. Sorry, I'm using the management terminology here. But whatever a temple can do, whether they can run weekly courses and things like that, talking about the ancient wisdom and cultural events and things like that can be used. I think we can definitely look into that perspective as well. But a lot of work needs to be happen in that area for sure.
I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Ankit, for being here. It was absolutely wonderful hearing from you. And yeah, over to you, Kanish, for the ending.
Yes, and I think this makes it our second episode, and I don't think we could have done it any better after meeting with Madhukeshwar ji. And guys, that will be all. This was Turk. Thank you so much for playing to this incredibly long episode, but I'm sure time really passed by. I mean, it's been like 2 hours now, but didn't seem like it at all. And yeah, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, and all of the favorite streaming platforms in an audio format. And of course, we're on YouTube where you're seeing us right now. And yeah, stay up for the next episode. See you.